In case you haven't heard of onX, we're a company that makes apps for outdoor adventures. It began in 2009, distributing GPS chips with cadastral data in Montana. onX Hunt grew out of that and is still our biggest app. onX Off-Road came after that, followed by Backcountry. While each app is carefully tailored to the use cases of its audience, all of our apps include high-resolution imagery, a topographic base map, stunning 3D mode, offline maps, weather, public and private land ownership data, curated adventure content, and tools for measurement, routing, and tracking. With our focus on outdoor adventures, we need a lot of different point of interest icons, POIs, over 150 just for recreation points. Each onX app uses a different subset of our icons and with different colors. Originally, we used sprites for our POI icons. We had a set of kind of brown and white, national park, classic-looking icons, but for a number of reasons, sprites weren't working very well for us. First of all, we wanted to use 5 different versions of each icon, and the reason is because of how they're used on the map. We have the icon-only shape, which is used for less important POIs, so it's less prominent on the map. The circle is the default for most POIs, and then we use the square for the most prominent POIs, and that differs by app. And then the round and square versions also have a selected state icon. Having all 5 versions for every POI would make the sprite sheet 5 times bigger. Also, sprites are raster images, even if they're built from source SVGs, vector graphics. So when stretched, they look pixelated. Each onX app has a different color palette, and we wanted to use different colors for the icons in different style sheets. For example, these waterfall icons show the different blues used by the different apps for water points of interest. This is part of our sprite sheet, the old brown POI icons in it. Now we don't have to include them in our sprite sheet. Incidentally, you can see the icons that we did keep as sprites because those are good for things like tiled patterns and multiple color sprites. Keep in mind that white is a color, so if you want even something in white, it needs to be a sprite. The final reason sprites weren't working great was that our design team integrates our icons into the UI of the apps. When we used sprites, you had to look in our GitHub repo to find them. So you had to get access first, and then dig around and find the sprite sheet, which was one file full of every icon, and then somehow use this JSON to decode what part of the file you wanted and what it was called, and it just wasn't very usable for designers. So we started using glyphs instead of sprites for our point of interest icons. Glyphs solve all the problems I just mentioned. We create 5 symbol fonts, one for each of those shapes. In addition, we began using Figma to create, organize, and manage our glyphs. Before I continue, who in here is familiar with Figma and has used it? Okay, good. Some familiarity. So there's many benefits that we get from using Figma for this. We can lay out and color the icons in whatever ways are helpful, and in lots of different ways. It's easy to see a whole set of icons together, which was not easy before when they were individual SVG files. We can add and edit the icons right there in Figma, have a lot of editing tools, or if someone prefers using Illustrator, they can do it there and then drop it into Figma afterward. Figma enables us to visually communicate with other teams. I created a page for each onX app in the Figma document to show what icons the app uses, so anybody can get a sense of what that looks like in the map. Then we make our icons into something called a Figma component. Then we can configure variants of that component. Our variants are the different shapes and whether or not it is selected. Then when you make a copy, which is called an instance of that component elsewhere, it retains a connection to the parent component. So if the parent is changed, all instances are updated. It's also easy to change the shape and selected state of any instance when it's selected. In this interface, you can change the shape in the drop-down and the selected state with the toggle. You can even change to a different component just by clicking the drop-down next to the component name. Components are not just useful within our own Figma doc, but are shared as a library with other teams. Our icons as Figma components are used by many teams throughout onX for things like prototyping, user research, and UI design. This is the usage from Figma of just one of our icons, the campsite icon, which is used by 7 different teams across 10 different Figma files. And then to follow that pipeline to the end, here are some places that our icons are used in the onX apps, in a legend and next to search results. Now I'll tell you more about how our Figma doc is set up. We have one big document, one big file with multiple pages, and each page serves a different need. The parent components live on an all components page, and each of them has their 5 variants there. This is where we import the icons and set up the variant logic. Then there's one page just for each variant, which is the shapes, and those are used to export each symbol font separately. Tony will cover that more later. On our documentation page, there's a section for casual visitors, as well as workflow and troubleshooting information for cartographers. As I mentioned before, we have a page showcasing the icons for each app. I showed you the backcountry page before. This is the page for off-road. It shows all our icons, both sprites and glyphs, with background colors and images that match the map. Now I'll turn it over to Tony, who will tell you about how we automated the creation of our symbol fonts.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate. Okay, so now engineering. Before, I just want to talk about what a symbol font is, because we've been hearing this word and I want to drill it in. Basically, a font is a way to collect individual vector elements into one place. It's a file. These fonts you know all about, like you know what a font is because you choose fonts in Microsoft Word or Google Docs. Basically, those fonts are just collections of glyphs, which is another way to say a vector graphic, and it's assigned to a particular location in that file. So if you press the A button on your keyboard, you're going to get a glyph that represents an A to our human brains, right? These fonts are these symbol fonts are the exact same concept, except that instead of using iconography for writing, we're using iconography for a campsite or a waterfall. Same idea. So we can reference these icons in their vector format using this sort of container, which is a font. Yeah, that last point I just want to harp on. You know, our renderer, which is currently Mapbox.gl, can reference these fonts just like they reference any other font that you might use for a label. If you have the right character, instead of rendering an A letter, you see a point of interest icon. So exactly the same concept, and you can use symbol layers with these symbol fonts to render the icons on the map. So I want to talk about the workflow that we built to actually produce these all the way from Figma out to these fonts. And these fonts, it's important for us to note that these fonts are not just used in our map styles, but they're also used, as Kate showed a minute ago, across all of our other platforms. They're used on our mobile apps. They're used on our web application to show the exact same icons from the exact same source using the exact same file that we use in our map rendering that we do in our user interfaces. So this is how we synchronize all of that together. This maybe look a little overwhelming. Sorry to make a flowchart if you hate flowcharts like me. But I just want to show you a little bit of how we do this. So you can see that we start from the Figma API. Figma has an amazing API. It's very hard to use, but it's very comprehensive. And so if you know how to use APIs, you will find it fine. We wrote a little Python script to pull from Kate's Figma file, particularly the one where it shows all different variants of a single of each icon. We pull that down into SVG files locally on our system, and then we have these configuration files which define which icons get mapped to which unique element inside a font. I'm going to go into that in a second. And we use this amazing, and if you're the author of this program, come find me, this program called Fantasticon. We got to work on the name, but we wrote this thing on GitHub, an amazing software tool where it basically creates many different formats of fonts, of which there are lots, and you can use it to create fonts and also related artifacts that help you use fonts. It's a really incredible tool. We wrap all this up in a makefile. I'm going to die on this hill. Makefiles are going to live forever. And we create these true type fonts, which are used across all of our platforms. I left out here that you also have to turn these true type fonts into a very specific rendering format for Mapbox renderers, but if you have questions about that, you can ask me about it. And so just a little bit of code, because I'd be remiss if I didn't show any, because I'm a software engineer. This is what it looks like to configure one of these fonts. We have 5 different fonts that we render, because we have 5 different variants for all of these icons. Each icon gets a, each variant type gets its own font. And it's very simple, right? All we do here is we have a name. We have the location of those SVGs that we pulled down from Figma via their API on the file system. We have what kinds of font we want to generate. And very importantly, at that last point, we have a file that maps each type of point of interest icon name to honestly just a random integer. It's not a random integer, but you can think about it for that reason. It's a way for us to reference the same part of the font, always matching to the same point of interest type. This is critical because we have 5 different fonts, right? Just like on your keyboard, when you push A, you expect an A to come out no matter if you're using Times New Roman or whatever, Open Sans. The same concept is here too. We use the same glyph character in our style sheets to reference a single point of interest, so when we switch fonts, it needs to reference the same icon type. So this is how we do this. We use this code points file. We assign these arbitrary code points to these icons, and we can use the fonts across all of the different places we need to use it. And then finally, I built this kind of fun little workflow, nice to have. This is, it's honestly super hard to explain this really quickly, but the bottom line is that this gives our cartographers and designers a really fast way to look at the output of this font creation pipeline to just sanity check that the point of interest name is mapping correctly to the right icon across all 5 of these fonts. So it's just a way for us to see, and this is built, importantly, this is built from the output, not from the input. So you can see, like, do all the fonts map to the right characters? Do they have the right variants and the right type of font? That kind of thing. And this is just like a very simple HTML page that pulls in those fonts and displays them. So to summarize what Kate and I both talked about today, we switched to glyphs from sprites because they had distinct advantages that Kate went over, and they've really paid huge dividends in our design workflows, and also in our ability to share across our wider company and other designers and engineers. Kate has done an incredible, I would say, Herculean job to assign all of this the right place in Figma, and has made it really easy for our cartographers and other stakeholders to access these designs and modify them when needed. And we, on the engineering side, built this pipeline to automate the update of these font assets from our Figma source of truth all the way through to the font assets that get used in our map renderings and also across the platforms, or user interface platforms. And that's our talk. Happy to take some questions.
Okay, we can do 1 or 2 questions for these folks if anyone has some.
Hi, I think it's really interesting you're using icon fonts, since on the web, people have moved away from them and prefer SVG. And one of the reasons for that is accessibility. With SVG, you can give the icon an accessible name. So I'm wondering if that's come up in your process at all.
Yes. We're in the middle of refactoring this to use SVGs instead of the fonts for the clients. But the update pipeline still kind of has to happen the way that it does. So the Figma integration was kind of key to enabling that. The deliverable for our map rendering has to be the fonts, because that's how Mapbox expects it in the sign distance field format. But we are going to start delivering SVGs to the clients themselves for exactly that reason. Yeah.
Anyone else?
There's someone way in the back there.
Can the symbol fonts show multiple colors, like say a black square and a yellow fill in the middle?
You get one color, but you can also, I know in the client, they're able to define some kind of background or halo, because we have a blank one as well. And I think they superimpose one of the glyphs on top of a blank of the shape to kind of get 2 colors.
Aha.